In early 2025, U.S. President Trump imposed new tariffs on Canadian goods, causing significant economic strain. The 25% tariffs were seen as aggressive, impacting Canada's economy deeply. Ottawa voiced concerns while Washington remained firm. The USMCA trade agreement faced re-evaluation. Canadians reacted with dismay and defiance. Prime Minister Trudeau signaled a robust defense of Canada's interests. In a direct and pointed reaction to President Trump's economic policies, the government of British Columbia took a significant legislative step in March 2025. Premier David Eby's administration introduced a bill known as the Economic Stabilization Tariff Response Act. Its intent was clear: to provide British Columbia with the legal authority to impose tolls on vehicles, particularly commercial trucks, traveling through its territory between the contiguous United States and Alaska. This was a bold move, targeting a vital artery for American supply chains to its northernmost state. BC Deputy Premier Nikki Sharma emphasized that the bill was a preparatory measure. It did not automatically impose tolls. Instead, it equipped the provincial government with the tools to do so down the road if Trump continues to escalate his threats towards BC and Canada. This conditional approach was strategic. It served as both a warning and a potential bargaining chip. The message to Washington was unambiguous. British Columbia was prepared to use its geographical leverage if the tariff pressures did not abate. Premier Eby described the American tariffs as an unprecedented threat, even accusing President Trump of harboring ambitions to annex Canada. The proposed tolls were thus positioned as a necessary shield against perceived American economic aggression. The response from Washington, and specifically from President Donald Trump, to British Columbia's proposed toll legislation was swift and characteristically fiery. News of the Economic Stabilization Tariff Response Act provoked an immediate and aggressive reaction. President Trump, never one for diplomatic subtlety, did not mince words. He reportedly threatened military action against Canada, a NATO ally and one of America's closest historical partners. This was a startling escalation. Furthermore, President Trump was quoted suggesting that Canada should be annexed to the United States to avoid such economic consequences. Such pronouncements caused considerable alarm both within Canada and among international observers. They painted a picture of a U.S. administration willing to contemplate extreme measures in pursuit of its economic agenda. The threats following BC's announcement signaled a potential flashpoint. The assertive stance taken by British Columbia did not occur in a vacuum. It was part of a broader, though not entirely uniform, Canadian response to the renewed American tariff pressures. At the federal level, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau adopted a more critical tone. He publicly labeled President Trump's tariffs as a very dumb thing to do. Trudeau's government also announced its own set of retaliatory tariffs against American goods, signaling that Canada was prepared for a tit-for-tat economic confrontation if necessary. Ontario, Canada's most populous province and an industrial powerhouse, announced its own measures. Premier Doug Ford declared plans to add a significant 25% surcharge on electricity bound for the United States. Further west, the Yukon Territory, which shares a border with Alaska, also joined the chorus of defiance. Yukon Premier Ranj Pillai announced a series of measures aimed at reducing the territory's reliance on American products. This array of responses illustrated a multi-layered Canadian strategy. The prospect of tolls on the Alaska Highway, the primary land route connecting the state to the lower 48 through Canada, sent immediate waves of concern throughout Alaska. While a significant portion of Alaska-bound cargo arrives via ocean freight, the trucking routes through British Columbia are crucial. They carry high-value, time-sensitive goods, including fresh produce and essential supplies for various industries, notably the oil sector. Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy expressed his hope that the federal governments in Washington, D.C. and Ottawa would find a way to resolve the tariff issues amicably. He recognized the potential for severe negative impacts on state and provincial relations if the dispute escalated further. The Alaska Trucking Association, representing the operators who would be directly affected by any new tolls, voiced strong opposition. Jamie Benson, the association's executive director, warned that such charges would inevitably increase transportation costs. These costs would likely be passed on to consumers, leading to higher prices for essential goods across Alaska. As British Columbia brandished its toll legislation, prominent voices in Washington began to formulate their own retaliatory threats. Among the most vocal was U.S. Senator Dan Sullivan, a Republican representing Alaska. He took direct aim at a significant source of revenue for British Columbia, its cruise ship tourism industry. Senator Sullivan threatened to push for a waiver of a long-standing U.S. federal law, the Passenger Vessel Services Act, also known as PVSA. This century-old cabotage law mandates that foreign-registered cruise ships must make at least one stop in a foreign port when sailing between two U.S. ports. For decades, this law has meant that British Columbian ports like Vancouver, Victoria, and Prince Rupert have been essential stops for the lucrative Alaska cruise circuit. Senator Sullivan's proposal was to seek a legislative waiver, effectively allowing these massive cruise liners to bypass Canadian ports entirely. His message was blunt and confrontational. Canada, you don't want to mess with Alaska. The senator argued that such a move would not only punish British Columbia, but also provide a significant economic boost to Alaska. The cruise industry in British Columbia is a major employer, supporting thousands of jobs and hundreds of local businesses. The potential loss of these port calls represented a serious economic vulnerability for the Canadian province. Senator Sullivan's threat was not an idle one. The escalating war of words and threatened actions between Canada and the United States promised significant economic repercussions far beyond the immediate political theater. The intricate web of North American supply chains, finely tuned over decades of relatively free trade, faced the prospect of serious disruption. For businesses reliant on predictable cross-border logistics, this new era of uncertainty was deeply unsettling. The imposition of tolls on trucks traveling to Alaska would inevitably add to freight costs, a burden likely to be passed down the chain. This increase in transportation expenses would not be confined to Alaska. Canadian retaliatory tariffs would make certain U.S. goods more expensive for Canadian consumers and businesses. Similarly, President Trump's tariffs on Canadian products risked raising input costs for U.S. manufacturers. The interconnectedness of the North American economy means that disruptions in one area can have unforeseen ripple effects. For British Columbia, the decision to introduce the Economic Stabilization, Tariff Response Act was a high-stakes gamble. While the province aimed to protect its broader economic interests from U.S. tariffs, the potential counter-retaliation, particularly Senator Dan Sullivan's threat to divert Alaska-bound cruise ships, posed a significant risk to a cornerstone of its economy: tourism. The cruise ship industry is a vital economic engine for many coastal communities in BC, generating substantial revenue and supporting a vast network of jobs and local businesses. The loss, or even a significant reduction of these cruise ship stops, would deliver a severe blow to cities like Vancouver, Victoria, and Prince Rupert. This placed the BC government in a difficult position. On one hand, there was a strong imperative to stand firm against unprecedented threats from the Trump administration. On the other hand, the direct counter-threat to its tourism sector meant that BC's own retaliatory posture could prove costly. The province's leadership had to weigh the potential benefits of its toll proposal against the very real risk of significant economic pain in its tourism-dependent regions. As of early June 2025, the tensions between Canada and the United States, particularly concerning the Alaska route tolls and President Trump's tariff policies, remain palpable and unresolved. The path forward is clouded with uncertainty. Much depends on the political will in both Ottawa and Washington, D.C., as well as in provincial and state capitals like Victoria and Juneau. The Economic Stabilization, Tariff Response Act in British Columbia, with its expiry date of May 28, 2027, offers a time frame, suggesting that these measures are perhaps seen as temporary tools for a specific crisis. One potential trajectory is further escalation. If President Trump maintains or intensifies his tariff pressures, and if British Columbia proceeds to implement tolls, the cycle of retaliation could deepen. Senator Sullivan's threat regarding cruise ships could become a reality, leading to significant economic damage in BC. Other provinces and states might be drawn further into the fray, expanding the scope of the trade war. This scenario would undoubtedly harm businesses and consumers on both sides of the border. Alternatively, diplomatic channels could prevail. There is a strong underlying recognition in both countries of the immense mutual benefits derived from their close economic partnership. The coming months will be crucial in determining whether cooler heads prevail, leading to a pragmatic resolution, or if North America is set for a period of sustained and damaging economic friction.